Welcome back to another episode of the Writer's Review, where today I'm taking a look at Sufficiently Advanced Magic, written by Andrew Rowe. So, Sufficiently Advanced Magic is the first installment in the Arcane Ascension fantasy series, written by Andrew Rowe. The series thus far is comprised of 2 published titles, with the third on its way and slated to release on December 6th, 2020. And probably we're gonna get even more books later on after that. In terms of structure, the novel is very straightforward. It features only one point of view character throughout its entire length, so there's no real need to keep track of multiple parallel storylines throughout your read. Also, somewhat surprisingly for a fantasy novel, it has an almost complete lack of flashback sequences. Therefore, the read is a very fluid experience without the usual constant interruptions for interludes every couple of chapters. Also, the prose is mainly comprised of a first-person past tense style of narration, which further aids to the immersive feel of the novel itself. Story-wise, it's really hard for me to say anything concrete without going into spoilers, because important events start happening from the very start of the novel. The setting I'd describe as a late 19th century magic-fueled feudal society, and the rough premise is that a 18-year-old teenager goes to tackle a dungeon on a noble quest to discover what happened to his older brother, who had disappeared 5 years prior. As usual, things go sideways from there, and as the storyline develops, the novel gave me a sort of Harry Potter vibe, with the whole magical high school plotline and the teenagers being trusted to prevent several civilization-ending events. Now, if we take a peek at Sufficiently Advanced Magic subgenre composition, we'll find loads of dramatic and action elements. The action set pieces are in large part divided into 2 main categories, the first being dedicated to the characters tackling the different traps and challenges of the dungeon, and the other half being dedicated to character-to-monster and character-to-character combat, with all of these, of course, having a huge magic-oriented twist. The dramatic elements, on the other hand, are more or less made up of the protagonist's social positioning within the mess he finds himself in, partially made up of him trying to figure out the motivations of those around him, what faction they belong to, and whether he can trust them or not, and partially made up of him trying to form friendships with his classmates and professors to form a sort of mini-faction to stand against the evil forces and their schemes. And as far as less prominent subgenres you can expect from this book, first there's comedy, which is in the usual range you'd expect from any typical book. Here, for the most part, it's made up of character-driven humor, and by I'd say that these elements are more prevalent in the latter half of the novel, just due to how the book's plot turns out and when certain prevalent characters get introduced. You'll also find a bit of romance elements, although these are barely present. In my opinion, these elements felt tacked on more as an afterthought than an integral part of the novel's plot, although I haven't started on the next book yet, so I can't say whether the author was just setting up for a more in-depth romance subplot for the sequels. Next, you've got the philosophical elements, which are quite prevalent in the novel simply due to how intertwined the novel's plot and its religious systems are, and it's quite interesting to see how the individual main characters handle their religious beliefs, especially since their deities are active, physical actors in their world. Next up, you've got the combination of world-building and fantasy elements, with these mostly dealing with the novel's extensive political background, as well as the rules around its magical system, and the religion and how that ties into both of the previously mentioned items. And lastly, despite not being a horror book per se, Sufficiently Advanced Magic also features quite the extensive suspense element, and the book had me on edge and on guard throughout the entire read, and this is mostly due to the large emphasis on intrigue in the novel's plotline, which more or less puts a huge question mark on every character the protagonist meets along his journey. Now, if we quickly go over some of the novel's other quirks I think you should be aware of. First of all, the novel kind of features its own original magic system, And I say kind of because in large part it's still just a rebranded version of a typical magic system you might find in D&D, although the author did add on a bunch of new ideas and played with the rules and mechanics of already existing tropes, and in doing so he managed to make it feel new and fresh enough to be interesting to read and learn about. And secondly, the novel features a lot of in-depth engineering type sections, where the protagonist goes about creating weapons or other items that suit his needs. Honestly, I was a bit surprised to find these sections in the book, since this is a fantasy novel. Typically, I find these kinds of sections more in hardcore science fiction books, such as the Kloboves series by Dennis E. Taylor, for example, or The Martian by Andy Weir, but it was a nice thing to see in the novel and an awesome addition to the book. So, in conclusion, Sufficiently Advanced Magic is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. I originally picked up the novel on a whim during an Audible 2-for-1 sale, mostly due to its length. Going in, I didn't really have many expectations for the novel, especially since I was unfamiliar with the author's other works, but in the end, I really got pulled into the story. In fact, I liked the novel so much that I reshuffled my video schedule just to move up this review higher up the queue. What I enjoyed most about the novel were the complexity of its plot as well as its protagonist. As for the former, I really got the feeling that the author spent a lot of time thinking out the individual events and when and what to reveal to the audience, so I'm really looking forward to picking up the sequel to this book. And as for the main character, he felt believable and had just enough internal conflicts for an 18-year-old to be relatable, but not annoying. So, if you are considering picking up Sufficiently Advanced Magic, I'd say you should go right ahead. But if my word isn't enough for you, I'll have the book's ratings up on screen now, just like usual. All in all, Sufficiently Advanced Magic, Arcane Ascension, Book 1, comes in at about 200,000 words in length, or 22 hours for the audiobook version. As usual, the ebook version is the cheapest out of the bunch, coming in at $4, followed by the paperback version at 4 times as much, at $17, and lastly there's the audiobook version at $25 straight up, or 1 Audible credit. But as I've mentioned before, the novel also shows up on Audible's 2-for-1 sales, so if you're looking to be really efficient with your Audible credits, just wait until the novel shows up on one of those. Of course, prices might have changed by the time you're watching this video, so I'll have an Amazon link linked in the description below, so you can check current pricing, and it goes to support the channel as well. That's it for the spoiler-free section of this review, and I'll be going on to the lesson section next. If you like how I approach these reviews and would like to be notified when I upload more in the future, do consider subscribing to the channel, or just like the video so YouTube knows to show it to other people who are looking for a new book to read. Anyways, on to the lesson section, and again, spoiler warning ahead. So, what struck me most about Sufficiently Advanced Magic, and this is really something I noticed at the very end of the novel, is that throughout, there isn't really one singular character who serves as Corin's main antagonist. And this is really funny, considering that the novel has a really prominent feeling of, oh no, the bad guy is gonna do something evil, we should really do something to stop him before everything gets destroyed. So naturally I asked myself, how is it possible that a book without a clear antagonist can be so tense and stressful to read? And after a bit of thinking, I came to the realization that the novel also doesn't have any real good guy characters in it. In fact, Corin is the only character that we know for a fact has positive motivations, while all the others are a bit of a mystery all the time. Once I made that connection, I quickly realized that the book itself isn't stressful to read because it features a big baddie with overwhelming strength to worry about, but instead is stressful because you're constantly paranoid of which of Corin's supporters is actually a traitor. So it's not that the novel features one clear antagonist, but instead features an unknown number of unknown antagonists with unknown motivations and unknown allegiances. The author really goes out of his way to cast mystery and doubt on the various characters. For instance, when Katashi and Karis cross swords at the very start of the book, it's basically a 50-50 between which one of the two is the bad guy. The author really goes out of his way to cast doubt and mystery on the different characters. When Katashi and Karis cross swords at the very start of the book, no context is given for their strife, so it's basically a 50-50 chance whether one or the other is the villain. And as the story progresses, the author gives out a ton of misinformation, painting both of them as the bad guy. So Karis in this example gets painted as a visage killer, while Katashi gets painted as an invading force. And both of these claims get further reinforced later on through the memory crystal and Katashi's direct assault on the city. And these are examples just for these two characters, but the same pretty much happens for every other character Corin encounters. First with the voice of the tower, then Vera, then Corin's half-sister, then the professors, Jin, Derek, and so on. So I guess that's one method of writing an antagonistless novel, which keeps the reader perpetually paranoid of every single character they meet. And who would have thought that such a thing was even possible? Honestly, I'm actually looking forward to trying this one day. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this video. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking around. If you enjoy these kinds of writer-oriented sections, do consider subscribing to the channel, because I do have a dedicated writing video coming up in 2 weeks. That is, if all goes according to plan. Until then, thanks for watching, and have a pleasant week.